Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my bro on. I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell you about his book. Why don't you go ahead and tell the people who you are, what you do, why you do it, and what you wrote?
Yes, sir. So my name is Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and I am the founder of Identity Talk Consulting, which is a professional development firm that focuses on three pillars. We focus on anti-bias and anti-racist practice, identity-based education, as well as culturally responsive teaching. And prior to doing this consulting work, I was a middle school math teacher for a decade at Philadelphia and Boston. And most recently, I wrote a brand new book called Learn to Relearn, Supporting Identity in the Culturally Affirming Classroom. And that's going to be out on Amazon this Friday, November 15th. So if you want to get a copy, make sure you go there and pre-order it today. But we'll dive right in so you can learn more about it.
So, first of all, bro, even after we hit record, congratulations yet again on, your heart's work and message being put out there for folks. As we begin to talk about it, man, let's start big picture. Let's talk about your freedom dream for this work. What do you hope anybody who picks it up would gain and thereby do because of what you've put together?
Well, before I answer that question, I want to thank you, Bobby, for helping to contribute
Hmm.
to this freedom dream of a book, man. Just your insights in the whiteness chapter and just the work that you do. You know, you've always been an inspiration for me, even from the time that we started to lock in
Yeah,
during those COVID days, man.
yeah.
I've seen the evolution, and it's been dope to see you grow this work that you're doing with the Liberation Lab. Now, let me get to your question. What do I hope for this book? I hope that this is a book that gets people to see fundamentally the importance of centering humanity, not just in our students, but all human beings. That's really what I want. I want this book to be a book that teaches all of us how to be better humans towards each other, but most importantly to ourselves, because we know that as Black and brown people, we deal with all kinds of internalized trauma as a
Yeah.
result of our experience in this global society.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Knowing you for the time that I have, I know that you are particular about your language and what you're trying to communicate. So talk to me about the title. Talk to me about, why you titled the book Learning to Relearn and what you're hoping folks like even from that, how they are encountering your work.
I think selecting a title was a messy process.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that came later in the process. I think
Okay.
when I first started writing the book, it was reshaping the teacher identity as a spinoff of the first book I wrote, Shaping the Teacher Identity. And it didn't quite hit the way I
Hmm.
thought it would.
Okay.
But then as we were going through the process, myself and my editor, Tracy Zagers, shout out to her, um, we just thought, man, what would be a good title that would get right to the point and really culminate all of the high points that you share in this book. And Learning to Relearn just stuck because
Hmm.
it really spoke to the very process I went through to write the book. I had to reframe and really unlearn and rethink some of the things that I knew or thought I knew about different communities and different identities. I
Hmm.
had to do my own capacity building throughout this process. I had to be called in a number of times. I had to be directed to different documentaries and different primary sources in order to get the full authentic details of different historical events. I had to turn to subject matter experts like yourself and many others who contributed to getting this book to where it is. So the whole process that I went through is what the title is. And I can speak about it authentically because I actually had to go through it myself. I had to
Mm,
rethink my own identity, going beyond being a first generation Ghanaian American, but thinking about the other identity markers that I hold and the privileges that I have that come with it. Thinking about the fact that I live abroad and I have two passports. One is official, the other is a tourist one. Thinking about the fact that I'm American on foreign soil.
mm,
Thinking about the fact that I have the ability to speak fluent English, which allows me to have access to specific spaces that people within the host countries I've lived in didn't have.
mm.
And these were just some of the things that I had to be more aware of. And the more I dove into the scholarship of critical race theory, but more specifically, Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, the more I started to piece the puzzle together and find ways to frame it within my own life. So I think once I was able to put everything together and connect it to my own experience, things just took off from there.
Often we think about, as someone who loves books and enjoys reading and all that, um, we often think about the book and who we will be as a result of reading some type of literary work, whether it be an article or whatever form of reading you're engaging in. But I don't think we often think about who the author has become as a result
Mm.
of writing the book. And so if you could go back and talk to yourself day one of beginning this process, what would you tell yourself thinking about who you are now as a result of writing it?
I would say if I could talk to my day one self, I would tell that person to really spend time getting to know people. Make sure you ask the right questions, understanding that there are certain questions that lead to answers that marginalize the people that you're posing the questions to. So I would tell that person to really be mindful of what type of dialogue you want to have with folks because every question holds its own purpose.
Hmm.
So really being mindful of what you're posing and also being honest about what agenda you're trying to fulfill by posing said question.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that has carried me throughout this process. The curiosity that came with learning more about the different people, the different histories and stories that people shared. The more I dug in, the more I wanted to really uncover these different truths that are being censored from our curricula nationwide. So I really was more intentional about it. But that's something that I would inform my younger self
Yeah.
a few years back when I started this process.
So you mentioned there the curiosity piece, which I always find is like something I come back to all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, and we've had this conversation, but
Yeah.
in the same way that when we go to a medical professional about any condition that we have or something that we're trying to get better in, what the medical professional will do to is they will ask better questions to get to the root of issues, and to prescribe a better way forward, right? So better questions lead to um, a more imaginative, a more free future, if you will. And so I think about that mindset, and I think about your writing, and I think about teacher mindsets that you talk about, like teacher identity and teacher mindsets throughout your work and in this book. I'm thinking about the educator who may have hit that that plateau you talk about, that professional plateau where they are they can't grow, or they feel like they haven't, maybe their leadership or their teaching fervor has kind of waned with all the things that are happening in education and the things yet to come. How would you say that the concept of learning to relearn will help them when they feel stuck or jaded in their practice?
You come with the questions, bro. You be coming with them questions, man. Let me sit on this one for a sec.
Yeah, please.
But go ahead and repeat that question. I want to make sure I
Yeah, please,
capture the
please.
essence of it.
So folks who are stuck in that plateau where
Mm-hmm.
I'll even make it even more plain, right? I have worked with and continue to work with teachers who, in some places, educators of all spaces, district leaders, teachers, principals, who feel like they wouldn't describe it as a plateau, but what they would do is feel like they don't have anything else to learn. So they feel stuck or
Mm.
jaded in their practice.
Okay.
But I'm imagining that person pick up your book, and I am sure that you want your book to impact them in some way. For the
Sure.
educator who's stuck or jaded, what does learning to relearn push them to do?
I think it pushes them to really be curious about why they feel like they've arrived or why they feel like they've plateaued. I would even venture to ask them, what is it that you feel like you already know?
Mm,
And based off of that response, you can then start to have even deeper dialogue and find out, well, all right, if you believe that you know this, let's get some receipts. What are some actions that you've done to justify that you've plateaued in this area? Because as you know, Bobby, the one thing about doing identity work,
hmm
whether you want to
hmm
call it DEI, whether you want to call it any of the CRTs, whatever terminology you want to use, the foundation of that learning is critical humility. And it goes back to my forward writer, which you know very well, Dr. Ilana Silly Ruiz, when she talks about the archaeology of self, when she talks
hmm
about her racial literacy development framework. Critical humility and critical love are foundational elements of this learning.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge the fact that we have not arrived, but in order to get there, we have to do a lot of self work, and some of that involves therapy.
Shout out to therapy.
Yes, like therapy, even taking emotional intelligence classes, because
Mm,
I believe that these are tools or mechanisms that allow us to really consider other people's perspectives and life experiences.
mm,
You
mm.
can't know what you need to work on unless there's someone out there who will guide you and show you what exactly it is that you need to work on. Like you need somebody to get you there, but you also have to be willing to embrace that dialogue and the criticism that's going to come with that.
I love that. And shout out to Dr. Yoli. There are not enough superlatives to describe her authenticity, the fact that she is like literally walking love, and how she embraces and does this work just from a place of just utter love and desire for all of us to continuously grow, improve. And with all she knows, she embodies that critical humility you're talking about, because
Yes.
she'll, you know, you think she should be teaching you so much, and then she'll ask you questions, and it's like, I mean, it's just amazing.
But you know what, Bobby, I gotta add to that, bro,
Please.
because with Dr. Yolanda C. Ruiz, affectionately we call her Yoli.
Yeah.
When I first started to write this book, matter of fact, it was when I did my podcast episode with her.
Okay.
Her episode, which was an amazing one, where she talked about her book Love from the Vortex. That was
Yeah.
the book that was out at the time. Amazing book. Make sure y'all go cop that. We had an amazing hour and a half conversation. We went well over time, but it was so
Yeah.
worth it. And at this time, I was probably a few months into the writing process for Learning to Relearn, but it was under a different name. And I asked her, hey, I'm writing this book that I'm hoping to get published with a publisher, and I'll be honored if you could be my forward writer. And without hesitation, she said yes. And we barely knew each other. She
Wow.
barely knew me.
Yeah.
That at that time it was just a concept that still needed to be fleshed out.
Yeah.
But it was enough for her to believe in it and to fully put her whole being into the work.
Yeah.
Like that's who she is.
Yeah.
That's who she is, man. Like she just sees the best in people, and she will speak life into you whenever she sees you. No matter
Yeah.
how many months have gone by, it's like you pick right back up with her.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Dr. Yoli, if you ever hear this, I mean, the impact you've had on folks is profound. And so, brother, to that end, when we
Mm-hmm.
think about this idea of an embodiment of the critical humility and critical love that educators need to walk in, what you said made me think about how even now, like right
Yes.
now as we're recording, I am continually thinking through working out in conversation with others and in therapy the ways that I have internalized um, misogyny and toxic masculinity. Um, and I feel it's appropriate to bring that up even now when we consider the timing of this recording. We
Yes.
consider what our world looks like, what we consider how folks felt on November 6th, um, and all of those things. And here's why I bring that up. It would be negligent, I think, for anybody who is trying to do any labor of love, any work towards justice and things like that, to critique the world without ever investigating self. And I think as I've seen it play out and I've heard the responses, the right responses, the justified responses of black women in particular saying, y'all got it. Like, we showed up, we did our part. Y'all got it from here. I'm choosing me. It would be wrong of me
Mm-hmm.
to sit here and critique what's being done on this national scale without interrogating how I've done that on a personal scale, where I have made women feel like my efforts are going unnoticed uh, or not honored in this space. It's not safe with you because of how you've conducted yourself. And so I say that to say, as educators,
Okay.
how you live, think, breathe, all those things comes into the classroom, comes into the educational space. And a lot of times people want to have this bifurcation between the two, and it just doesn't exist. What you believe is going to show up in what you do, regardless. And I know that that's part of what you believe, but could you kind of speak to, you know, that process and some things that came up for you as we were sharing around this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the end, our life experiences inform the way that we do our work as teachers. There's no way that we can separate our life experience from the work that we do. That's number
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Um, Anybody that's gone through the K-12 schooling system like you and I have, we have our favorite teachers and we have the teachers that were not so great.
mm-hmm,
And quite frankly, they all play a role in how
mm-hmm,
we do the work. For some of us, we get into the work because we want to be better than the worst teacher that we ever had, ever.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
for others, we get into the work because we want to emulate or be half the teacher that our favorite teacher was to us.
Us, yeah, yeah,
That's how a lot of us enter the work. But to speak on just the misogyny and the toxic masculinity piece,
Yeah.
that really played a role in me really being intentional about doing emotional intelligence classes with my wife. It made me
Mm,
more intentional about really bringing closure to the childhood trauma that I had as a result of my father.
yeah.
Like having building up the courage to say, hey, this is how this harmed me, and
Yeah.
this how it's impacting my ability to be a family man, to be a parent, to my two sons, and to just be an overall better human. Because regardless of how much we try to be there for our wives, right? We carry a part of our parents. I carry some toxic traits from my father, and it does manifest itself in the way that I parent sometimes. And it does manifest itself in the way that I interact with my wife. But the one thing that therapy has allowed me to do is to identify when I go that route.
Yeah.
I can point it out and say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm acting like daddy right now. I'm being that person that I said I didn't want to be, and I have the agency to redirect my behavior
Yeah.
and hold myself accountable
Yeah.
for when I do go down that path." So I
Yeah.
think that's where the power lies for me. And I believe that's the case for many other people who have gone through similar situations as I have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think whether it's perfectionism,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is people pleasing, whether it's anxiety, and all the branches, if you will, off
Yes.
of this tree of trauma that we might have experienced. That stuff can come out in how we interact in our interpersonal daily lives. And it also will come out in how we lead and serve our students for those educators who are listening. And so I hope that they're hearing from you and I the need for us to gain a sense of wholeness that if we don't interrogate self, get others around us to identify those blind areas, those blind spots that we might have, you know, missed, or that we're not looking at, and interrogate those things, we'll wind up perpetuating continuously the things that we say we don't want to be. So with that, the danger is if we don't interrogate self, then we will
Mm-hmm.
critique in the world what exists in ourselves. And I hope that folks are hearing that from you. On the heels of that, I want to ask along the same lines with regard to kind of your journey. You speak a lot about reflective practice,
Yes.
being a reflective educator.
Yes.
And you speak about it coming from, and I love this, the student centered approach, where students um, are the ones who have the most to tell you about who you are as an educator and how you can improve if you're willing to listen. My thought is, in your journey, can you like speak to how that's been helpful for you, students being the teacher in your reflective practice? And then the second question along with that is, how do you recommend that other educators who maybe haven't done this begin to step into um, empowering student voices to improve their own practice?
I think if we are being honest,
Yeah,
the reason why we engage in this work is because of the students.
100%.
If we think about it from a customer service standpoint,
Mm,
our students are our customers.
yeah,
And it is our job as educators to provide quality service. We have
mm,
to sell them on what we are promoting to them.
yeah,
That's our job as educators. So it doesn't matter how good we think we are. It doesn't matter how great we think we are or how many credentials we have. If the kids still feel like they've been wronged in some shape or form, just like if we were to go to Target or Walmart or any other store, right?
yeah,
If we feel like we've been wronged, No matter how good that human is, we gonna tell them something about themselves. We gonna want to demand the manager or whoever in order to rectify the situation.
Yeah.
Same with kids.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. So for me, we have to be student centered because the very reason why we do the work is because of them. And who better to guide us in how they want to learn and should learn than kids? Who better
Yeah.
to do that? They know themselves better than we know them.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Um, and then as far as getting teachers to buy into this concept, well, the thing is, we also have to, and we don't have enough time to really dig into this. We also have to rethink what does it mean to be a quality teacher.
My.
Okay. And we're not going
Yeah.
to go too deep into it because there's a lot of layers to unpack. But I will say this: I'm a firm believer that students will forever be your rep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Students are the biggest evaluators of my performance, not my principal, not my instructional coach, and definitely not no damn rubric.
My.
It's the students. It will always be the students.
Yeah.
And if you've passed their barometer, whatever their standard is for you, you have done your job. And I believe that in order for us to move forward and in order for us to be the student centered educators, we have to adopt this mindset of that and not be so caught up with how we're being evaluated by our principals. Now, yes, we understand that there are a lot of factors that tie into that. I mean, you're a principal yourself, Bobby. Like, there's assessments,
Yep.
there's student growth, right? There's also some of the other aesthetics that come with getting that high score.
Yeah.
Bulletin boards. Is your
Yeah.
agenda on the board? Do you have your standards on the board? Are you posting student work? Are the exemplars on these bulletin boards? There's a lot that goes there, but I think ultimately, if we're not being responsive to students' needs,
Yeah.
if we're not taking the time to get to know students and by extension their parents, their
Yeah.
families, then what are we doing? How can we
Yeah.
possibly be student centered if we're not looking at the student as a whole? If we're not accounting for the things that make that student a whole person, which is the families, the things that they like
Yeah.
to do, their pastimes, and
Yeah.
all these other things, as well as their identity markers, which bring us
Mm.
back to why this book is so important. Learn to relearn, because ultimately it is these identity markers that greatly inform the way in which they navigate this global society that we are in.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking, I thought about my first group of students, and you know this, but I started in Camden, New Jersey,
Yep.
and I started in a charter school, um, and learned very quickly that I didn't know how to teach, even though I went through my teacher prep program, and and I was handed a book. We've talked about this book in detail.
Oh boy, not this. Yeah.
um, and I ate it up. I thought this was the way that I was going to affect change in my students, and I
Yeah.
realized that I became an agent of harm. Right,
Mm,
and while I've had to go back and literally going back and apologized to those students,
mm-hmm.
the moments when we just got to kick it and got to build our relational capital with one another are the things that I think have lend itself to them saying to me, you are still my favorite teacher. And for me, that means more than any Danielson, uh, means more than any TNTP rubric, um,
Mm-hmm.
or anything like. And not to put those things down, but to say that if we You can get a 4 in Danielson and completely miss the student in the process.
Yeah.
Danielson, there's a lot of things that Danielson will point you to. And you know, we can use it and we can talk about it, we critique it and all the things. But at the end of the day, if you miss the student, if you're
Mm-hmm.
not responding to the needs of your learners, if you feel like they have to respond to how you teach versus you responding to their needs, I think we are in for some trouble.
Mm.
and and so I hope that folks are going to be like gravitated to pick up your work and to really invest in this growth process that I think you have them on as they encounter um you know those things that they're writing about here. And so as we round out our time, I want to zero out and talk about your work as it comes out Friday, set amidst this backdrop of all the things that are transpiring in our world right now with this election and all the things.
Mm-hmm.
You call us to consistently the educator's role, if you will, in justice, right? You've talked about how education can either perpetuate or challenge injustice. And so I want to ask, and I want you to, feel free to build upon freestyle, like take this and run with it. But I'm thinking about how folks who may have gone through the present educational system and been successful will not critique or even have a lens for how injustice is perpetuated now because they've been successful.
Wow.
They feel like those who have
Wow.
come through it are going to be successful by
Wow.
default.
Yeah.
Speak to that for us. And then also your book in light of this backdrop of pushing forward towards justice, even while things seem to be growing towards a different avenue, if you will.
I mean, you got one of our favorite people in the world in the background, Mr. James Baldwin. God rest his soul. And he told us this. If anybody's ready to talk to teachers,
My.
I believe it's a must read for any pre service teacher that wants to get into this work,
Yeah.
that really wants to get into this equity based work
Yeah.
grounded in justice. But I will say this, though. I think for those educators that you just described in your question,
Yeah.
those aren't the ones I'm targeting, bro. I'm not targeting them because I know what time they're on.
Mm.
See, I want to make good economic use of my time by focusing on people who are either aligned with me or have a keen interest in wanting to know how they can get to that level of alignment with me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I write the book for them.
Yeah.
I don't write it for people who are in opposition to how I feel or to what I believe is to be the case, because that's just not a good use of our time, especially now. I'm all
Mm.
about building community, Bobby. We talked about this off camera. We're trying to build community,
Yeah.
and I can't build community with people who are not in alignment with how I feel and what I believe is to be good practice as a
Yeah.
teacher. That's
Yeah.
a prerequisite for me at this point.
Yeah.
Now, if we're able to convince some people who are on the other side of the spectrum to come on to our side, that's honestly icing on the cake. But I know for a fact that the bigger challenge for all of us is not the people, it's the system.
Mm.
The people are beneficiaries of a white supremacist system that continues to make them believe that they're quality teachers when, in all honesty, they really aren't.
Mm.
We got to
Mm.
address that
Yeah.
because that's what's going to be key to righting the ship. If we
Yeah.
continue to focus on individuals, we're not going to get there because here's the thing. Yes, it's Trump who's back in the Oval Office, But quite frankly, it could have been a Democrat. It could have been Kamala. It could have been anybody else. It doesn't really matter because in the end, we're still ingrained within this white supremacist system,
Mm.
regardless of who is sitting in that seat. And I think if we can continue to remind ourselves of that, then that's going to allow us to navigate this work and this terrain in a way that's going to yield the results that we're looking for.
You know, for those who who are listening, I would say really quickly, and then I want to kick it back to you for some final thoughts. But I want to say really quickly that it would be foolish, I think, of anybody who is looking at the way that our nation and our world runs. It would be foolish for us to arrive at a conclusion that the world does not benefit men more than women. Be a foolish thing. You can
Right.
look at a bunch of different metrics to arrive at that determination, a bunch of different studies to arrive at that determination. And if we go back and trace that, men in power who wanted to favor their interests made laws. These laws, made with their mindsets and things at the time, prioritized their interests. And it would be foolish to say no to any of that. That is a fact. It happened. And in the same way,
Yes.
when you peel back those layers and you dig deep into the work of Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and you think about the intersectionality of all of that, we know that this world favors a particular kind of man. So when we say white supremacist, and somebody might hear that and be triggered or wonder, have questions or things like that, what we are saying is the default mode of our world favors a particular kind of person, and you don't need to look far to figure out who that kind of person is. And with that, how can we do the work necessary in ourselves, in our families, in our schools and communities to create a world that works better for more and better yet all of us? And I hope that folks who heard what you're saying, who pick up your book, do that with that in mind. Because I believe firmly that one of the places that you will begin to see this work of justice come to fruition is in our schools. Because our young people are the people that are going to be the coming, in all these areas of influence they're going to be able to go to. And if they just encountered somebody who was pushing them towards justice, truth, um, helping them to navigate a world with folks who do and do not think, vote, act like them, and be able to navigate all of that. I think that's the joy of what we get to do when we wake up in the morning as educators. And so
Yes.
I want to push people there, um, on the heels of what you just said. But
Yeah,
with
for
that
sure.
being said, when it's a two-parter, and it's going to lead you to kind of just plug all the things and get people to know where your book is and where they can get it. If you were to look back 5, maybe 10 years from now, and you talk about this in terms of success, right, and relearning and redefining success, you've talked about this. But when I
Yes.
think about your work and your book, how will you know 5 years from now that it was successful? And then I want you to just plug your book and where people can get it.
Wow, that is a big question, Bobby, and I'll do my best to answer it.
Yeah.
Um, See, I think we have to first off determine what constitutes success.
100%.
For me, it's not it's not the book being a bestseller. That's not what success is for me. If I'm able to sell millions of copies of this book, that's awesome. The standard of success for me is what people do after they read the book.
Mm,
If all it ends up doing is getting more people to start book clubs where they just intellectualize what they've read and just have very strong, nice, polished dialogue on the content,
some great conversation.
then guess what? All this is just a great conversation.
Yeah.
It's not leading to the transformational change that we need in order to disrupt these systems that we just spoke of that are ingrained in white supremacy. I'm sorry, I'm not going to use supremacy. I'll just say white dominant culture because it's safer. But we don't want the fragility tears. But anyway, no, seriously. Um, no, but I believe that that's going to be the measure of success. What people do beyond the book club,
Hmm.
are they going to use this information as a way to build those build that cross racial solidarity?
Mm-hmm.
Is this book going to lead to more movements
Mm-hmm.
of folks who are across different intersections of identity and are walking together, building together, collectivizing in the name of justice? That's going to be the barometer for me,
Yeah.
because the reality is this. I want to be a book where you have educators doing that, but also I need for students to have the language that's necessary so they can better articulate who they are
Yeah.
and how they want the world to view them. See, when we talk about identity, we focus so much on social identity. Social identity is the story that society tells about the people. But your personal identity is a story that you tell society about you. So I believe the goal for Learn to Relearn is to push for our young people to tell the story that they want to tell to society and those
Mm-hmm.
who are within it. That's the power of it. When you have the language to speak on who you are and you're able to get that education, now all of a sudden people can't tell you who you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
You already have the agency to counteract that and say, no, this is how I'm going to show up in this space, and there's nothing you can say or do that's going to sway me from that position. And there lies the power of having this book, because in the end it's about affirming culture. It's about supporting identity, meeting people where they are, and not
Mm-hmm.
trying to do things to get them to adopt a specific mindset that's so distant from who they truly are to the core that they then lose themselves in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And there are way too many stories that we have heard and witnessed over the years that lets us know this book is more urgent than ever for
Yeah.
folks to have. There have been many books that have talked about anti-racism, that have talked about anti-bias, all these things that we share. But I believe that this book is the first of many that I hope that speaks to the specific histories and issues of historically marginalized communities and goes into depth about it with the counter stories and first person narratives. If you can name a
Mm-hmm.
book that does that, then guess what? You've won $1 million. But I don't think there's any book, and I'm not even trying to brag, Bobby. There is no
Yeah.
book like mine out in the market right now that is going in depth and has the balance of rigorous scholarship
Mm-hmm.
coupled with storytelling from educators, community activists, and other influential figures from these different historically marginalized communities that I speak of.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this book so powerful, is the fact that it's not just me being a spokesperson for all those different communities. It's them contributing as co-curators of this reading experience that people are going to engage in when they get this book. And I'll just stop right there.
Man, that's great, brother. For folks who this is their first time hearing your brilliance, and also for the first time maybe hearing about this labor of love, this work of genius, how can they get in touch with you? And then also, um, how can they purchase and support your work?
Okay, so the first question was this. You could go to my main website, identitytalk4educators.com, for all things identity talk. You'll be able to get information about my services and offerings for PD. You also will learn about my podcast, Identity Talk for Educators Live, where I interview the educators that we've spoken of throughout this past almost hour or so. And then, as far as where to get the book, go to learning2relearn.com. So it's a numeral 2 in the middle, and you'll be able to purchase the book from the website, but also you'll get access to free resources to extend your learning. So everything that you see in the book is going to be housed on the website, learning2relearn.com. Make sure you pre-order your copy today on Amazon. And please tell a friend to then go tell a friend, so then they could tell another friend to go buy a copy. And better yet, let's take it a step further. Get a copy for yourself. You read it. You then experience how it's transforming your practice. And then that should encourage you to go to your principal, go to your dean, go to your VP, go to your instructional coach and say, hey, we need to get this book for the entire staff. And then all of a sudden we got bulk orders. Now everybody's experiencing the joy that you experience. So that's what I envision for this book. And I
Yeah,
really hope that people indulge in it, just like you'll soon indulge in it when your copy comes.
100%, brother. I I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate that, our friendship is online and offline. I
Yes, sir.
appreciate that for those who don't know, you've continued to be a person that I can say like, yo, bro, I'm not understanding. I need some help with. I don't have to have the armor on all the time. I can just come and be like, hey, bro, help me out with this. So I appreciate you. I can't wait to read, get my hands on this work. And also, bro, I am just super proud of you and hope that others get to experience the brilliance that I know. So appreciate you, brother. And thank you for spending this time.
Man, appreciate you, Bobby, man. You already know how I feel about you, man.
100%.
Yes, sir.